Welcome to Novels and Nightcaps, the podcast where we read, we drink, and we ramble. My name is Gabe.
And I'm Nor.
And this week we're diving deep into Book 2 of the Hierarchy series, the follow-up to the beloved Will of the Many, Strength of the Few by James Islington. We're super excited. This just recently came out, and we read it as quick as we possibly could to be able to actually give a proper, full review of the work. We just recently recorded, I guess it's been like, what, a month maybe? Since we, I think a month since we talked about Will of the Many, maybe 2 months. And so we're pretty fresh on this. Will of the Many came out a couple years ago, but we just recently read it. So we're coming off fresh from our excitement from Will of the Many, excited to figure out what that ending meant. And before we get into our drinks, I want to make very clear, if you haven't read Will of the Many, go read that first. The first 15 minutes of this podcast will be spoiler-free for Strength of the Few, but not spoiler-free for Will of the Many. It's kind of inevitable. We have to talk about the end of Will of the Many to even give a jumping off point for Strength of the Few and a bit of our general impressions. So just be aware, off the bat, there will be spoilers for the first 15 minutes for Will of the Many, but it will be spoiler-free for Strength of the Few before we transition into a deeper dive into our opinions on the spoiled section. Good. But before we actually get into that spoiler-free review of Strength of the Few, Nor, what are you drinking today?
Today I have made a gin Ricky, which is basically gin, soda water, and lime juice. And it tastes like a really alcoholic Sprite. Yummy.
That sounds delightful. I said, wow. Sounds very refreshing.
What about you?
I am drinking an old fashioned. And my explanation is that an old fashioned can go a lot of ways. Well, it's called an old fashioned. There's a lot of riffs on it. You can have a Oaxaca old fashioned. You can add chocolate. You can go more of like a tropical vibe. There's a lot of different places, innovative places that you could take an old fashioned. This, however, is a traditional old fashioned, which kind of reflects a little bit of my opinion on Strength of the Few. There is so much possibility, so much potential within this book. And yet I am happy with it. I liked it, but it didn't necessarily reach the heights that it could have, if only it strayed a little bit from the path. So that's a bit of my opinion on it and why I chose to drink an old fashioned. And I don't even got to tell you, it tastes like an old fashioned. It's delicious. It's the tried and true tested formula for an old fashioned. And I'm actually using it's an artisan bourbon that I got from a distillery. I did a bourbon tour with my father and mother and also wife, I guess my just whole family. And we got a bourbon that was only available at the artisan distillery in Kentucky, and it is just delicious. So cheers. All right. Nor, can you give us a little bit of a jumping off point? Where did we end with Will of the Many, and where does Strength of the Few pick up as a little bit of like a tease for people who read Will of the Many? What should they expect from Strength of the Few?
Will of the Many takes place in the Catan Republic, right? It's this Roman-inspired fantasy world where the top of the pyramid, the top overlords of this country, run literally on the willpower of the people below them. So there's a lot of commentary there, very nuanced, very complex, hefty questions being asked throughout the first book. And we find this protagonist, Vis, a former prince of another republic that was taken down by Catan. And he is thrusted into the academy, the prestigious Academy of Catan, right? Where all the future political leaders are being raised and upright. And he's sent there to investigate the murder or the supposed suicide of his adopted father's brother. And then at the very end of the book, something crazy happens, right? He runs the labyrinth. The whole book builds up to this moment. He runs the labyrinth, and through a whole lot of mumbo jumbo that is so hard to explain, our protagonist Vis essentially splits into three different people, or rather, he gets copied into two more people. So there's three different versions of this Telemus in three different realities, three different worlds, right? And quite literally, and sort of cliffhanger, all of a sudden we have three different versions of our beloved protagonist, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a universe that is much bigger than we realized, with much higher stakes than we realized. And suddenly the hierarchy doesn't seem as big of an issue as you would have imagined. So, coming into the second book, there's a lot of expectations. It really sets itself up nicely for, you know, a pretty generational run. I mean, the hype was real for this one. I don't think I've been this excited for a book since Wind and Truth, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good, and I think we can probably safely recommend before you read Strength of the Few, which I think you should. I would recommend it. I do think that this is a very good book with some interesting problems that we will talk plenty about today. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a good book. And so I would highly recommend reading this because, I mean, I simply just really want to see where this story goes in the end. But with that being said, if you read Will of the Many years ago, you're probably going to want to reread it or at least watch or read like a very dense summary of it because you get thrown in. There's not much, or you can listen to our podcast about it.
There we go.
I see where you're going with that. I see what you're going. Yeah, or go listen to our podcast as well where we talk about it because you kind of get thrust back into the world and there's not a whole lot of explanation to, get you up to what's going on. And I mean, there's so much packed into this book, so it kind of makes sense. So we would definitely recommend reread Will of the Many and also listen to our podcast and also read any summary that you need to because you're going to need it because buckle up. This is a really intense journey with so much going on. So Nora, thank you for that quick overview because that is just the beginning. And so overall impressions, general impressions of the book. Nora, would you recommend it? And what did you think? Just on a very, very like surface level, without any spoilers, without giving away really anything at all. What did you think?
If you were a big fan of The Will of the Many, which I think everybody should be reading, it's a great book. I think you will like this one. Definitely recommend this book. It is very ambitious, as you would imagine from a book that splits its protagonist into three different characters, essentially different characters. And it's very ambitious. It asks a lot of questions, just like the first book did. I will say that it spends a lot of time setting up these new worlds, as you would expect. And so a lot of the book is essentially just building up, setting up for what's to come. Definitely has a couple of pacing problems, I would say, a couple of other issues that I'm sure we're going to talk about. But as a whole, I would recommend it. If you were already hooked by the plot in the first book, then you just have to know what happens next. So I would 100% recommend that for the fans of the first book. Is it as good as the first book? Well, we're going to talk about that a bit more into the
Yeah.
episode. But
And to add to that just a little bit,
I would say, yeah,
I was never
check it out.
bored, which is probably important to mention. There are areas that I was more interested in than others, but I was never bored about what was going on. I very much was interested the entire way through the book. I was listening to the book. It was an audiobook for me, but I never felt the need to skip forward or anything like that. The equivalent of skimming, whenever you're actually reading a book. I never felt that urge personally, and I thought each of the three worlds were extremely unique. And is it spoiler to give a brief overview of each of the three different worlds? Is that a spoiler? Well, okay, if it is a
I
spoiler,
wouldn't say so. No.
yeah, leave now. But the three different worlds are, first of all, Res, which we're familiar with from Will of the Many. Res is the central storyline that I think everybody is most interested in. That's not like a slight to the others. It just is, it's the characters we know, the people we love, and the Vis we know. And that's kind of the central thread that we all really want to see. But then there's also Obitium, which is this post-apocalyptic kind of barren wasteland with desert, and it's quite barren, and you get this kind of dreadful feeling whenever you're in those chapters. And then finally there's Lucium, which is this kind of tribal, I don't want to call it barbaric, but it's essentially life without the hierarchy is what it is. And it's a more traditional kind of fantasy approach, where you strip out many of the Roman elements, and it develops into three very different and interesting storylines that we, of course, talk about. But those are it goes from each chapter to the next. You're switching between the three different visi, through the three different characters in kind of going through their own journeys within these new places. And by the end of the book, they are in very different places. And I think that is done really well. And if that interests you, this really unique and honestly innovative storytelling device that I'd never seen before, it is used, and I don't think it's disappointing. I think overall, he succeeds in achieving what I believe he set out to do. But that being said, there are problems, as we will talk about. Still, I was very engaged. I mean, it feels like we can't really talk about anything without spoiling. So, as we said, this book is for people who liked the first one. Yeah. This book is for people who liked Will of the Many. So if you liked Will of the Many, you should read this. I think that pretty much answers it. You might be frustrated with some elements and not frustrated with others, but overall, I think you'll have a good time. You're not going to waste your money. This is something that, oh wait, we're supposed to give our overall scores. We usually do that. I give it a 7.75. My overall conglomerate score is a 7.75. I liked it. I thought it was very good. There are definitely some problems, but it is 100% worth your time. Nora, what did you overall give it?
Yeah, I agree with what you said. Definitely has its problems. If you're a fan of the Will of the Many, I think you're gonna stick through it, and you're gonna read that through the end because you're invested in the story, you're invested in the characters. For me, I give it a 7.2, so just a bit lower than yours, but I would still recommend it, and I am still excited to see where the story goes. I would say, before we get into the spoilers, I would say that all the problems that this book might have feel necessary. So it feels like we do need to spend some time setting up these new worlds. It feels like we need some time, especially Islington, right? I feel like he needs some time.
Islington. He clarified this on his Instagram.
Islington.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
Islington. I feel like he needed the book to figure out how to actually write these multiple perspectives of a character who has been split into three and is still the same character, and yet goes through so many different character progressions to the point where by the end of the book, you could argue that these are completely different characters. So I think the problems that this book had, we won't see that as much in the next book. But
and also I've thought deeply about this because one of the things we do here on this podcast, if you haven't listened to it before, is we often try to determine what the problems are, but also how you can fix the problems, or at least what we think you could do. And I have some impractical solutions to this one, some solutions that I'm not so sure he could do, but still are possibilities. So if you haven't already, go read the book. We're now diving into spoilers for Strength of the Few. Okay, so first we should probably talk about characters. This is an area that I had some reservations. I had some problems with definitely the book, but also some areas that I thought were a huge improvement from the first one. So Nora, you start us off. What did you give characters on a scale of 1 to 10? On your objective scale of 1 to 10, what did you give characters?
My objective absolute scale for characters, I gave it an 8 out of 10. I thought it was probably the strongest point of the book. Although, as we will talk about world, I mean, you could argue that for me, at least, they're both kind of on the same level. I was genuinely impressed with characters. I think a lot of the problems regarding characters in the first book were more or less acknowledged in the second book, especially for the characters in Rest. Specifically, though, the three different versions of Viz, all three different versions, I thought the character progression was so interesting, and It really brought a lot of existential questions in the way they differed so greatly. Found that fascinating. That was probably my favorite part of the book. Seeing how Viz changes as a character. I thought it was a big step up from how Viz had everything figured out in the first book. He could solve all these problems so easily. And in this one, he was largely a fish out of water. He spent a lot of time unconscious and waking up in a different place. He spent a lot of time being beaten up, adapting to his lost limb, adapting to his new powers, adapting to his new position of power in Catan, and in all these different worlds. I thought that was fascinating. The side characters felt a lot more polished. Although I will say that in the two other worlds, in Obitium and Lucium,
Yeah,
the
Obitium and
characters did
Lucian.
feel a little, yeah, they felt a little bit too stocky for me, a little bit too flat. Not all of them, but a good majority of them felt like archetypes. But that being said, the main characters in Res felt a lot more polished, which I enjoyed because those are the ones that I was connected to the most to begin with. What
Yeah,
did you
I
get
I
there?
definitely I definitely blundered though in not fully considering this as he's obviously a character. I should have really I was immediately thinking of all the characters around this because he just and this speaks to how good of a job Islington did with Vis's choices and distinguishing between the three worlds. But like I don't know, in my head he was just so ingrained into the narrative that like I forgot to think about him as a character. I don't know. I have no good explanation for this. I give it a 7.5. And the reason I gave it a 7.5 is because of exactly what you said with Obitium and Lucium, where I just, there wasn't really much I cared for there. It's not that they were necessarily like poorly done. They did fall into archetypes and what's her name? Tara? Is it Tara? The warrior woman he fell in love with in Lucium felt like she was designed for him to fall in love with, and I just wasn't a fan of that. It felt similar but worse to
Astrid
Amisa in
from
the
How
first
to
book.
Train Your Dragon.
Yeah, but it felt like Amisa from the first book, just like slightly more shallow. And I wasn't a huge fan of it because again, we've seen this kind of exact thing of this really powerful woman who is really strong and he's super attracted to that. And then he fights, fights her, he trains with her, like that whole we already saw that in the first book. And so I was really not super bought into it. Not that it necessarily took me out of the story, but I just didn't care. Like whenever her life was in danger, it didn't matter to me. And same thing with Obitium. Was the I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. You kill you Cleese you kill score's brother, Celior, see him. The
I don't know
adoptive
how to
father-in-law's
pronounce it.
brother. Okay. But you know who I'm talking about. The names are really difficult in this, and I listened to
Yes.
it. Anyways, him, the one of the most important characters. I'm
The
assuming there's
MacGuffin of
some
the first book.
yes. It seemed like there was a really there's something really important going on with him and Obitium. So I'm sure that he's off doing something and I'm sure it's really important. But I really liked him at the beginning of the book. And then when he left, I really had a difficult time connecting to the other characters. Um, and so that was even Amos, who was Amos had an interesting storyline. It just was introduced in kind of a weird way, and there was a lot of big time jumps that told me that they were close instead of really like showing that development of their relationships, which was trying to make up for the lost time compared to Rez. But Rez is exactly what you said. That's where the characters shine. That's where Iqua really became a great character in this book that I didn't care for in the first one. So yeah, in Res it was done very well. I was not as impressed with the other two worlds. So that's my basic. But we need to talk more about the three different Vises. So we have Catenicus in Res, just to separate them in a sort of like tangible way. There's Catenicus in Res. There's Silverhand in Lucium, and then what do they call him in the other world? They have a name. They have a name for him. We can just call him Vis if we don't remember his other.
It was like Siamin,
Siamun. Yeah,
Or
Siamun.
Siaman.
Siamun is how I pronounce it. Yeah, Siamun. So if
Siamun.
Siamun, Silverhand, and Catenicus are the three different ones. So what struck you? And you said that this is one of the most intriguing points for you that made you ask a lot of like deep questions. What were some of those questions, and how did they really differ?
Like I think the biggest thing for me was how like fundamentally different they felt at the end of the book. like how big of a role your circumstances play. And similarly to Project Hail Mary, I mean, we talked about this in Project Hail Mary. We talked about this in our Batman episode. Humans are very resilient and very adaptable. I mean, we don't like it. We don't necessarily like it. And so when something traumatic happens to us or something life-changing, it takes time for us to get over it, perhaps. But at the same time, we do have the capacity to be incredibly resilient. And so you have Viz being literally stripped away from his world and from everything he knows and being thrown into these different realities where nothing ties him back. Like there's nothing tying back to him. There's no Catton, there's no Suze, there's his parents are nothing exists. His culture is not there anymore. All he has are his ideals and his beliefs and his personality. And even that changes. And then another thing I found particularly interesting was specifically Silverhand Viz and how he spent a lot of the early chapters in a house with this family that took care of him, and he had all this peace and all this freedom, the very thing he wanted at the beginning of the first book, just to leave it all behind, to leave the hierarchy behind. And he had it, and all this fight that he had in him building up throughout the first book, all of a sudden just gone, because here at last is the thing he wanted: freedom, peace, a family, right, love. But that's not who Viz is. And so seeing how all the events unfold, right, we have him at the end of the book, at the end of the Strength of the Few. He takes up this position as a druid, as a almost another ruler, another Catanicus. He just goes back to this role of Catanicus, and it really shows how these circumstances seem to keep finding him, but at the same time he's just that type of person. And so the big question, and it's hard to articulate it, but I guess the biggest question is like how much of ourselves is already like part of us, like how much of us is just us and how much of it is our circumstances. It's the old question, nature versus nurture, but on a
Yeah,
personality level. And I thought that was
and
fascinating.
to like further your point, you see the situation impacting him so much. So while like Silverhand Fist does end up in this situation as like a kind of leader, as a ruler, it's fundamentally different from Catanicus. Fundamentally. Because I get the feeling that if Silverhand Fist was put in the same position that Catanicus is at the end of the book, where he gets this opportunity to basically become a necromancer and raise an undead army, I don't think Silverhand would. I think he would say no. He would. There's a sense of honor that Silverhand has that the other two do not. That's a result of his surroundings. That's a result of his situation, and a result of his father coming back. And I definitely got the feeling, and this kind of goes into how by the end of the book they truly feel like different characters in the way they think and process and believe. Silverhand Vis feels like the man his father wanted him to be, and Catanicus feels like this middle ground in between, where he's kind of stuck in between two impossible choices. And then Obitium Vis feels like he's going in the wrong direction. He's crossing a little bit of that line that he seems to have made. There is this element of controlling people that as the book goes on, he seems to get more and more comfortable doing without questioning much. And I think it's one of those things that those to ignore your ideals in order to further your goals, right? Add up until you're a completely different man. And it's kind of what I mean. It's Iden, correct? Iden is the one that draws that says like draw. Every man has to have his line, and Catanicus seems to try and ride the line. The guy in Obitium, Siamun, crosses it, and Silverhand seems to like keep firm to it. Would you agree that that seems to be like kind of to me the distinction between the three? Because obviously Silverhand's not he doesn't face the same choice that Katenicus does. He doesn't have to choose, at least from our knowledge currently, right? He doesn't have to choose between the end of everything or the end of some of us. So that's where I don't know. I definitely found them to be drastically different characters by the end, and it was convincing. It was very convincing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It was again the most fascinating part of the book. I think it's the thing that kept me going the most, that kept me interested. Super interesting stuff. Very, very impressive that he was able to pull that off in a subtle way. The whole idea that you are the sum of your actions, and little by little, you do eventually change and transform into this new person. And it's this idea of like, a plane changing its trajectory by just 1 degree can end up in a completely different part of the country. You see that same thing here with Viz. Just little actions, circumstances, yes, but his choice in the face of said circumstances. At the end of the day, that is what defines him. And so he's been slowly changing. And I would agree with you that Katanika seems to be the middle ground. Silverhand seems to be the more morally righteous character, and the more morally questionable character is Siamun,
Yeah, the last we
which is
see of
gonna
him is
bring
him
up a lot.
stabbing a sleeping man. And like, yeah, it is really, really interesting. And one of the things that definitely, I think, troubled me a little bit is the lack of agency that we see. It seems like Vis throughout all three of these timelines gets pushed and pulled a lot more so than we see in the first book. And one of the things that I think we both loved about Will of the Many is the constant questioning of loyalty, trying to figure out who's an ally and who's an enemy, and really trying to figure that out through the entirety of the book. Whereas I felt, at least, that in this book, the lines were pretty clear for the most part. Vis knew who he trusted, like 100%, and the people he did not trust, 100%. Like, it's a lot. His loyalties are very clear in this, whereas in the previous book, it felt like one of the joys of reading was discovering the nuances of relationships. And there's a little bit of that, especially in Obitium, I felt. You get a bit of that, but that was a highlight of the first book that I did not see as present here, especially in Res. But did you feel the same way? And how did you feel about his lack of agency, especially in Res, where it seems like he kind of just gets put in positions where there's not really much of a choice and things happen and he responds to things happening rather than him acting and causing the action. Of course, besides the whole plot at the end to like, barter with the god Ka, right? Like, how did you feel about that?
It's not something I think I was too conscious about, but now that you bring it up, it definitely is one of the reasons why this book felt like it was missing some of the spark that the first book had. I mean, at the end of the first book, I was excited, I was hyped to read the next one. After this one, I am interested to see what happens next. But I wasn't as excited. Definitely, the political intrigue was exciting in the first book. The whole, who's my ally, who's my enemy, who's my friend, who's my foe, who can I really trust? It was a big part of the first book. Definitely missing in this one. You would think, right? Because he starts this first book. Catanicus starts by defecting to governance and being taken under the wing of Calidus's father. And so you're introduced to his father and you're introduced to Olivia, and you think that some relationships are gonna like bloom in there, and you want to know if, maybe he's trustworthy, maybe he's not, maybe she's trustworthy, maybe she's not. And then they are sort of just dropped halfway through the book, it feels. I feel
Yeah.
like I was only reminded of Livia's existence until near the end of the book when she apologizes for something
Yeah,
that
she
happened
was a
at
bit of like
the
a sandbag that he dragged around a little bit that was not really relevant because of it's like whenever you have to bring, like your little sibling along and you don't want them to interact with the rest of your friends because your rest of your friends are doing stuff. I don't know what that's like because I am the little sibling. But like that's kind of the vibe it felt.
It is literally the context of it's the context of that scene
I guess
or
this
of any of
this
her appearances.
this kind of naturally goes into plot, so we should probably talk about like the plot of the book itself. I gave it an 8 out of 10. I still was very interested. I very much still liked it. I like where it's going. I like the intrigue. I like that it feels like things keep getting turned on its head. And particularly, this is spilling a little bit into impact. I loved Equals Death. That might be controversial. I really liked it. I also come from a background that loves brutality in books, to be honest. Like I really enjoyed Game of Thrones. I enjoy whenever characters die and it shocks me and it changes the paradigm. And I like whenever people don't get to finish their character arc, when it's robbed from them, because that seems like the violence of death. And it's something that I honestly didn't really see coming. Like I saw it coming in the moment. Like I immediately knew before she died. I'm like, oh, okay, she's about to get her head crushed. I knew that in the moment, but I wasn't seeing 10 steps ahead like a lot of times I can. Like I knew Calidus was going to die. That felt like what was going to happen. You kind of had that feeling that somebody has to die and it's going to be the one we like. Equa snuck up on me a little more and it was so exciting. And that definitely was the greatest impact in the book for me was whenever she died. And it was just so graphic and so awful. Yeah, huge fan of that scene. So I give it an 8 out of 10 and I very much liked where everything was going. I liked the different plot lines. I loved the beauty of Lucium and the beauty of peace and how it really felt like he was able to be happy. He was able to find his way in a group of friends that I didn't care about, but the actual moment of him finding his peace there and truly sharing a piece of him and opening up and just the context surrounding that, I really enjoyed. And I liked seeing him happy. I don't know. It's after all he's gone through, it was good to see him happy and see how that impacts his choices later and how he feels like he has a sense of honor. And maybe that's drawing a little bit more into character, but Lucium's balance was a really good equilibrium for me. And in Obatium, his clear goal added a very good route for me to kind of keep on target for that world. And in Res, I mean, there was a lot of really good twists and turns, and I very much I don't know, I enjoyed the plot. What can I say? I wasn't the whole time I was interested in what was going on, and that's for me, that's a check, If I never got bored, check mark, it did pretty good. But of course there are some problems. So, Nora, what did you give plot?
Plot for me was a bit lower. It was 7 out of 10. I think I agree with most of what you said. It was definitely exciting. I think for me, the pacing just threw me off a lot. And like I understand it, given the novelty of this like narrative device with having the protagonist be three different people in three different worlds. It's not entirely linear as in other books. Like in Stormlight, you have all these different POVs, but they are relatively chronological. There's like maybe one or two exceptions where it's not. And so the pacing is not that hard to, mess up. In this one, the pacing did throw me off. The chronology of it all threw me off. That being said, the plot was still interesting enough for me to keep going. I enjoyed it a lot. There were definitely some moments that made me just like react out loud. Especially Ostius's, encounter with the council. That was one of my favorite moments. It was
Yeah,
so
that was so
cool.
good. That was so good.
Easily one of my favorite moments. I think it might be my favorite moment of the book. Um, I think as you were talking about like the different worlds, got me thinking. Character wise, I think Lucium was my favorite. Just seeing Viz happy was exciting. It was peaceful. There was a lot of serenity to it all. Everything felt like nice and quiet and zen, and seeing him become the man his father would have wanted, the man he, I think, deeply wanted to be, just by being open and honest and sincere. He's not very deceptive in that world. As compared to the will of the many, he's constantly lying. As opposed to Res, he's constantly lying. In Novitium, he's very sneaky. In Lucium, he is just himself, and it pays off, which I think was very rewarding. And seeing him bond with all these characters, even though they were very two-dimensional, and I just kept picturing the characters from How to Train Your Dragon. So they were just blank character slates. I was like, okay, yeah, I see who you are. I see what role you play. But seeing him bond with them was super satisfying. In Obitium, the plot felt like probably the most exciting, the most stressful, I should say. It felt very claustrophobic. Maybe because he spent a lot of times underground in tunnels, coffins. It felt very claustrophobic. And I enjoy that aspect of it all. I felt so stressed out for him in that world. And in Res, I felt like I got the best of both worlds, you know. His friendship with his classmates, the guilt he felt towards some of them, the trust he felt to the others. That was interesting to see. But I
I think that my biggest problem in like this is my initial reaction when reading it. In Obitium, I kind of got sick at, I was like, okay, dude, just get into the pyramid. Like I honestly just got very fed up because it was such a direct, clear point. And with Lucium, at least to me, it felt a little bit more meandering, but that was kind of part of the vibe. And it felt like there was no true path, and that's what I liked. I liked that it felt like Vis was figuring his way through the world, and he was trying to figure out who he is without this arm, right? Who is he whenever he is not an all-powerful military guy? And part of the stripping of his pride was essential to that plot line. And I didn't have as many problems with that, but to me, I really struggled with Obitium in the pacing there, especially because it did feel claustrophobic. You're completely right. And I really did like that. But it just felt like so the progress to him actually getting inside the temple felt so slow. And I would have enjoyed more time actually inside of the pyramid, inside of Ka's pyramid, where like he actually is. I don't know. I was looking for more. It seemed like once he got in there, we had a few pages of him going through and then he stabbed him. Like that was it. And I wanted more of a description of like the inside. I was wanting more about I don't know, I was just wanting more conversations inside, maybe with Ka. Hoping we get that. But I don't know. I definitely got quite annoyed with the fact that he kept trying and failing, and it just felt like such a slog. So that was to me the biggest like problem for plot, as well as what you said with like the lack of clear chronology. I kept expecting some sort of reveal that like something in Obitium happened years ago, or I don't know, something like not years ago, in the future. I don't know. I was expecting some sort of play with that because of how loose the chronology felt, and it also just was a little too loose, where the time passing didn't feel meaningful or well used. But except for in Lucium, I did feel like real time had passed in Lucium. I did not feel as much in Obitium. It felt kind of glossed over. But I don't know. What did you think about all that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think Avitium was probably the biggest letdown in terms of like how much potential there was there. You have this barren, desolate wasteland, right? That the war, the war happened, they lost. Avitium is lost, right? That's a big phrase that is repeated in the first book. And so you would think they would be a lot more excited. He does spend a lot of time just in the tunnels, staying hidden. And then all of a sudden, months happen and he learns how to dance and he infiltrates into this festival, which felt
I love
really
that scene.
random.
I know, but I loved it. It was
And
really funny. It made me laugh out loud.
it made me laugh,
Yeah.
but it felt not like what I was expecting. It felt a bit out of place. And I will say, like, in terms of description, and this might be like kind of leaning more into world here, but Obitium felt like the most like bland.
We can talk
Weirdly
about
enough for
world.
me,
Yeah, we
I
can talk
I
about
couldn't
world.
really picture this world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
agree.
couldn't quite picture it. But
So
before we get into world,
okay.
I use my bad. Before we get into world, you mentioned that there weren't really any parts that you skimmed through. For me, a lot of the parts in Nubitium were the parts that I did skim through. That felt a bit boring for me, and I think that's for me why plot is a bit lower than the characters, than world, and than plot in the previous book. But the world building itself, we can start talking about that if you want.
Yeah. So I gave World 7.5. It's a little lower than plot for me, and the real reason is I didn't feel, as you said, I couldn't really picture Obatium really vividly, and that was extreme. That was an extreme contrast to in Res. In Res, I felt like I was able to really get a good feel for what was going on. However, the hopes after the Will of the Many were to really understand the government system, the politicking, the usage of will. And while I did feel like we got a better grasp on will as like a system, it still felt a little too light for understanding the actual mechanics of the government. I really wanted to get into like some nitty gritty on the world there, and that would make it feel really alive. But I understand that we didn't have time. Like I get that. I get it. It didn't make sense because only like a third of the book can realistically be attributed to Res. And likewise with Lucium, I am interested in the politics of this world and what's going on. And while I understand to Silverhand Vis, it's not necessarily like super relevant and he doesn't really care as much. I kind of need a little bit of the drama to buy into what's going on. Like we kept hearing about different kings and lords fighting each other. I just none of it was relevant. And he points that out as being far off and distant, but that's the kind of drama that makes a world feel alive. And while I did like the idea of the grove and I liked where he drew the tradition, like that to me was really interesting, very well done. I felt let down because of the depth that we could have achieved after Will of the Many. And that gets me to my impractical recommendation that I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast episode. I think that he should have split it into 3 books. I would have loved a book on each world, each version of this, and I would have loved them released at the exact same time and all of them to be like 300 pages long, 300, 400 pages long. That would be my perfect world. The way to get me bought into each world without sacrificing the momentum of the other. Again, completely impractical, not a good way to make money. I understand that. But I was trying to figure out like how do you fix this? Because part of the problem with plot is you never get to be rooted in one setting because you get ripped out and changed to another world. And part of the problem with characters is that you want to go back to Res because that's who you care about. You don't care about these people. There's these archetypes and they're just you don't feel like a deep connection to them, but that's because we know the people that Katenicus is talking to. So by splitting it into 3 books, I think you get to give attention to each world a lot more intentionally and you get to take it at face value. And if there's a weakness in that world, it's number one, either a lot more like a lot more obvious. It probably would have been easier to fix in editing because Islington is obviously a very good writer. Like that's undeniable, right? He knows what he's doing. He's a professional. I think he could have handled that well. And it would remove the problem of 3 different perspectives of the same character. However, you would, I think, lose out on a lot of the comparisons of character that we were able to do. So there's a give and a take. But that's a very long explanation for what I think of World. So, Nor, take it away. What did you think of World?
3 different books.
How baller would that have been,
Like
though?
that idea.
That would have been so
That would have been
baller.
pretty cool.
Dude, imagine if it was
I
like
think
not one, and then it splits into 3 like at the end of Will of the Many, you know? I can picture the marketing campaign. More money, too. More money.
it would it honestly probably would have made more money. I think it would have worked, just the novelty of it. I think the way I would have fixed it, or the way I would have maybe written it myself, I would sort of take a page out of the Stormlight books in the sense that maybe part 1 only centers around 2 of the Vises, specifically the new ones, the new worlds, Obitium and Lucium, it would create this sort of like intrigue and mystery of like, oh, he's in a different world. Even though we already know that Viz still exists in Res and he did all that thing of defecting to governance and whatnot. But it builds the suspense for that because we're still expecting we're still waiting for that story to unfold. But at the same time, we're just thrown into these new worlds with Viz, where it's just as disoriented, lost. I mean, is he gonna try to come back to Res? Can he even come back to Res? I either would have done the second book, just Obitium and Lucium, or I would have done the first part, Obitium and Lucium, and then introduce Catanicus again in part 2 or part 3. That's what I think might have worked pacing wise, especially since the chronology doesn't really matter too much. They're completely different worlds, and the events of each of them don't necessarily impact the other, even though there's the implication that they are still connected with some of the phrases that Viz keeps hearing in the different worlds. He says them out loud. He catches himself saying those, and then we'll see those phrases in the different world. And I think even Aqua was death was foreshadowed. Yeah, Equa's death was foreshadowed by Lucium Viz, by Silverhand, because he has a dream of Equa being held by this older man in serious grave danger.
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
But anyway, for
I totally
World,
did not
I
catch
gave
that.
it
That's really good.
Yeah, as soon as I read that, I was like, oh god. But just like you, I did not see her death coming. I saw it coming in that moment when it was foreshadowed. And then in the moment that she repeated the whole idea of or when Viz said, "Rotting gods, you're having fun, aren't you?" When he said that for the second time in the book, it just felt like something important was going to happen. And then it happened right away, which a whole other thing. I'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, for World, I was torn between giving it a 7 or an 8. I wasn't entirely sure. I ultimately went with an 8, but I think as I heard you, it happens in every single episode, but as I hear you talk and you give your reasons why, it makes me want to reevaluate my own ratings. But I'm sticking with the 8. I think it was very interesting seeing all these new worlds unfold. I thought the way they explored or reflected Viz's personality and character progression was also interesting. It was very well done. The characters might have been two-dimensional in these other worlds, or one-dimensional in these new worlds, but the world, Lucium in particular, felt very interesting. Not the lore. The lore did feel a little basic and distant, and the names kind of flew over my head. I enjoyed the druid aspect of it. I thought that was interesting. And then, same with Res, I thought it was interesting. Kind of overlaps with plot a little bit, but seeing, the lore behind it, the revelation that the pyramids, even the primates or the priceps or precepts or whatever, the top dogs of the hierarchy, even they, the princeps, even they are not at the top because it's Ka, right? And that was a really cool kind of what's the word, bombshell.
Reveal,
it was exciting for me. The reveal. Also the story of Zeus and King Cristobal, finding the weapons, the cataclysms, learning about that. That was exciting. I thought that was cool, and it added more to this world. But my critique is very similar to yours, and it's my biggest complaint of the first book, I think. I still don't really know how Will works. It doesn't really make sense. I like the whole idea of a connection, finding that connection that helped this in Obitium kind of control the Gleaners and the Yungtai or whatever they're called, these husks of these undead characters. I thought that was interesting, finding the connection. But even then, I still didn't really know how the will works. And it's not entirely important, but it definitely makes it feel slightly undercooked in that regard. I thought this was going to be the book where we got a lot of answers regarding will, only for will to be expanded threefold, because now we have this idea that will that works in the hierarchy is not even the will that works in Obitium or Lucium. It's just different aspects of it, which again, interesting, but I still don't really know how it works.
That's-
So
that's-
that's my take on
the area,
world.
yeah, the area where like I did understand it was how Katenikis or like Vis, how his differed from other people around him. I think he did a good job of explaining how being synchronous like basically makes you more powerful, and how he needed to like hide aspects of his power because that would be crazy. I thought that was really cool. I thought that was very, very interesting. But I did want to ask about his father, about Seuss and the expansion of that. First of all, I really did like exactly what you said. The expansion of why they invaded Seuss, like getting deeper there was very well done. It's that type of detail that I wanted in the rest of the hierarchy, and I didn't get it. But going specifically with his father in Lucium, we see Silverhand Vis get to literally talk to his father. His father is actually there. And my probably favorite, not favorite reveal, that's not true. I really enjoyed the fact that his father really did talk to him at the end of Will of the Many. Like he was physically there and actually talked to him, and that wasn't just a dream. That was kind of cool. I kind of like that because not that because it felt very natural in the first book. Like I don't think anybody questioned it. This is something that, of course, somebody dazed and confused on their bed would dream of. They would imagine their father there. Like I didn't actually think his dad was there, um, and I don't think many people did. But confirmation that it really was him makes the first book, that scene, feel so much more powerful, and there was some truly like powerful moments in this book. So, did you find his father being in this book cheap? Did it feel like I don't know. I always think of second books in a series being like doing this, honestly, kind of this exact thing of, oh yes, but now we found your mother, or like now it did that. Yet I personally wasn't dissatisfied. Like it didn't take me out or anything. I quite liked it, but I'm interested in your take because this is something that we see a lot in sequels. They bring in family members that we thought were dead or lost. Like this is common. It's not unique. How is it employed here, and did it do a good job?
Yes. I didn't think it was a dream when it happened in the Will of the Many. I didn't think it
Really?
was literally there. I thought somehow Viz had found like a psychic connection to it, like the other world. I wasn't really entirely sure how that worked, but I think even Cristobal in the Will of the Many like explicitly tells Viz like, no, this is not a dream, but he doesn't necessarily explain it. He's very elusive about it. So I think whatever gripes I would have had, I came to terms with in the first book because I was like, "Oh, death is just a doorway to life." That's a mic drop that Cristobal has at the end of the Will of the Many, and then he comes back. I enjoyed it. I thought it worked really well, especially with this Vis, because a big part of Silverhand is how he has no ties, no more connections to Cotton or Suze or Rez at all. Right? He has this new opportunity to start fresh, and he wants to escape. He wants to avoid, the fight that he's been fighting this whole time because, you know, he's been running his whole life. He wants to just stop. But then seeing his father, his interactions with Cristobal were really, really well done. It's really meaningful, very emotional. That was like the emotional core of that part of the book, and the whole idea of like being lucky and how or being unlucky, like fate and circumstances and responsibility, which was a big part of the first book. This whole idea of like, are the complicit, are the complacent complicit, right? Just on a different level being explored in this book. I thought that was interesting. I will say what I did find slightly cheap was when at the end of the Strength of the Few, it turns out that his mom and his sister are still alive.
Well, they're
I would
not.
have,
They're
I think
dead. They're dead.
well, yeah, but they're young ties, so the characters are
Yeah.
still there.
Yeah.
Um, and death is just a doorway to life. So
Death is just a doorway to life.
I thought, I mean, I have no doubt that there's a lot of potential there story wise. I will say, like, if I have a gripe, it's probably that I would have preferred if they did remain death, but I am interested to see where that goes. And I
Did you
feel the
feel
same way
the?
with Calidus.
That's what I'm about to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel. I mean, don't get me wrong. I smiled at the end. I was like, "Oh yes," because I love Calidus. I mean, who doesn't love Calidus? And I'm sure that's gonna be very impactful, and it's gonna bring a lot of really good character interactions there. So I am excited to see where that goes. I will say with Calidus, it felt like it actually made sense because the necropolis, like the actual purpose of the necropolis and military having all these people there. So that didn't feel out of place. What did feel out of place for me was Viz's mom and his sister. But I am interested to see where that goes. It doesn't really throw me off. It doesn't really steer me away from this book. It didn't like suspend my
Yeah,
disbelief or anything.
I agree. I think it would have been more interesting for him to hope and look for his mom and his sister and not see them and have that like moment of devastation and then hear Calidus would have been like beautiful. I do think Calidus is really important. And the reason I think of that is like he undeniably has control over all the young T. Like he is their master. He is their like he controls them. That's not an appropriate dynamic. Like and that's not a good power dynamic. Yet I think that Calidus is somebody who can call that out and question that dynamic and really add some friction there that I mean, Aiden is like, I'm with you, brother. Like I'm here with you. I'm your ally. Even though he does call out that this is, he identifies that he shouldn't do it.
How this is so wrong.
Yeah, I think Calidus is just going to be that extra heart where he's going to die at the end of the next book again. Like he's going to die again. Calidus is already dead. That's going to happen. There's no way around it. So that's where I'm interested to see where it goes with that. But I do agree that his mom and his sister, the opposite could have been more impactful, I think. And that kind of leads into impact, I think, pretty nicely. I in retrospect, as we've been talking for already an hour, I would have rated this a little lower because there are areas where I see could have been more impactful that were less impactful because of the choice, but still impactful. I gave it an 8 out of 10. I should have given it lower in retrospect, but I'm still going to stick to my 8 because that's what I made after I finished it because that's what I, I thought. And I literally texted you. I honestly think I texted you first after I read that Equa died. I was like, I need a cigarette, dude. Like this is horrible. Like he has 2 broken legs. He's like he gets put through the ringer. We see him so beat up during this book, and the fight is intense. And there's just multiple scenes that, like the first book, I was really impressed by it. Like I was excited for what was going to happen because of how it changed so much. Less with Obatium, less with Lucium also. I was really hoping that the family that he was staying with at the beginning of the book would be killed. Not like not because I actually really liked them. I thought that funnily enough they were the best characters in Lucium were the like
Yes,
the mother and the kids. Like
100%.
they felt the most real. They felt very real and genuine and you could like I could feel his love for them and it made sense. There was such genuine connection there and I wanted to see them die. However, I did chuckle whenever they said it was a sheep. Like that was funny. It didn't feel cheap. I thought about it. I was like, does this undercut the moment there? And no, I don't think it does because it like makes sense and it wouldn't really matter if like the old guy died versus I don't know. It wouldn't have changed much, I think, if one of them died, right? It wouldn't have changed a whole lot. And so I don't think it really undercut it. It was a good joke. It was funny. But I do think it would have been more devastating if he went back and all of them were dead in the rubble. That would have been like uh other than that, pretty much Rez had all of the banger moments, I thought, for me at least. Like all of the banger moments. Whenever they killed like everybody in the military council.
That
I
scene in the book.
I have a theory. I think that and this is not a hot take, I don't think. Well, this actually we haven't talked about this. The dog, the wolf, the Alapai, Diago. Diago was good in this one. I didn't like him in the last one. I thought he was stupid in the last book. I was going to be so upset if he actually died in this book. I really did get connected to Diago. I liked him. I thought he was a lot less convenient. However, there are convenient elements like him just strolling through the streets with his Alapai and it just kind of is like, all right, cool. but I think that he was getting manipulated. I think Diago was manipulated into killing everybody at the military thing because we see, I don't remember his name. This is embarrassing. The guy that actually does
It's
the,
just
yeah, Osseous. Osseous, we see him before like lean down and play with Diago, and it seems like there's a connection there. And I wonder if he's able to like control him somehow. That might be an interesting angle to see if he somehow manipulated Diago into doing it. But that entire scene was so well done. In the moment he was like, "Hey everybody, this is Diago. You killed his family." I was like, "Oh my gosh, they all have to die. Like they have to. They have to die." And it was so took away his agency, but in that moment it felt like such a good choice to like push his hand to honestly start to occupy that middle ground that comes to define Catenicus. So Impact was an 8, honestly, because of that moment, because of the ending choice, because of all of those reveals, basically res in general. The impact is all there for me, not in either of the other places. Besides the beautiful feeling and that we've talked about, I did feel like actually happy, and that's an impact. And the philosophical questions about like what do you do with two impossible choices? I Is there any explanation as to why they can't just send more people into the maze? Can they just
I
have
didn't
more
pick up
people
on
be
that.
synchronous? I don't know if there's an explanation, but like, why not just have more people become synchronous? Like,
I think a big
I
thing was they can't have seated their will, and in this society, pretty much everybody has, unless
yeah,
you're like a kid.
that's a good point. Yeah, they
Aside
would
from
fail.
that, I don't know why they wouldn't. But I mean, I guess the
That's a
logistics
pretty
of
big
it are
point, though.
pretty
Yeah,
tricky though. Like, like, are you gonna have the kids just
dude,
risk their lives? I mean,
he should have a
Viridius was doing that to begin with, so
he should have a spin-off book where he just sends like it's like Maze Runner. It's a bunch of like teenagers. They step Viridius like flocks into the It's just after one after another they die. That's horrible. All right, sorry. Impact. What did you give Impact? I give it an 8 out of 10. I think I was a little generous. What did you give it?
I'm on the other end. I think I was a little too harsh. I think it could have gone a little bit higher, not by that much for me. I gave it a 6 out of 10. I don't want to compare it to the first book, and I don't want to let the like hype for the second book get to me and like cloud the judgment. So I thought about this one a bit. It took me a moment to like actually rate this properly. I was very. I think I texted you too. I was like, I really don't know how to feel about this book.
Yeah.
After I let my expectations, kind of simmer down, and I thought about it. It still didn't hit as much as the first book. The first book just asks some really good questions that I don't think are necessarily followed up to their highest potential here. Just like you said with the old fashioned, there's so many different ways you have the ingredients and you have like the core is really well like put together and it's already strong to begin with. And there's so much possibility here, especially when you have three different worlds, three different protagonists that are still the same character, and yet definitely not by the end of the book. So much potential. The questions that were raised in the first book, big questions. It was still done really well. I was still very excited to keep reading. I still genuinely enjoyed the book from start to finish, and I will definitely pre-order the next book as soon as I learn about it. And I keep trying to predict the title, because
Yeah, I was thinking about that too.
it keeps narrowing down. It keeps narrowing down. But you said it's
Will
not
of
a
the Many.
trilogy, right?
No, I think it's 4 books. I think he
Yeah.
made
So
he
so
decided it's 4
I,
books.
I'm still trying to figure that one out because the last title has to end with one. I'm sure,
Yeah.
but
The
I'm,
two
I'm
should
so
be like
excited.
the will of the many, strength of the two, weakness of 3. I mean, there has to be okay. We have like will,
Which
we have strength. It's gonna be like some other. Might be like power. I can see power. The power of one. Oh, that's probably gonna be. It has to be something like that for the fourth
yeah.
one. Yeah, like
Yeah, the
the
power, the might, something like that.
yeah the power of the one. Power of one. The I don't know. I
I
I'm
think
interested to
power
see what
might
it's
be
gonna be.
it. But or the rule of the one, who
I
knows?
definitely okay. Before we get into style, I do want to ask, what do you think is going to happen with the three worlds? I keep thinking like it's going to do one of two things. Either some of the Vizises are going to die, which I really hope is going to happen. I think that'd be kind of sick to have one of your main characters die, or they're going to do some sort of like power fuse. There, right? Like there has to. Yeah, I think it's gonna be like that's what I don't know why I expected that at the end of this book, but
The
I was
villain is called the
expecting that.
concurrence, right?
I think I honestly think Ka's being misleading. I think he's manipulating this a bit. I think he's gonna fight Ka
Well,
eventually.
yeah, that might be true. Concurrence, I mean, literally means, I'm looking it up, a point at which three or more lines meet. So I keep thinking, collision. That's what I keep thinking.
Yeah,
I think
that's
that's
a
what they're
good
trying
point.
to avoid, which weirdly enough is also what I think like the plot of the MCU is right now with the multiverse stuff. So maybe like culturally I'm just primed to expect that, but this is a lot more interesting because this is the right way you do the multiverse, you explore the same character in different circumstances. This is how you do the multiverse, even if
This is the
it's
best
not
multiverse I've
necessarily the
seen.
multiverse. Yeah,
Yeah,
you know what I
I
mean?
gotta
Like this is how
say,
you do it. This is how you do it.
I am definitely intrigued by Ka. I don't really get him yet. I was hoping to get
No,
a bit more.
I
And I
love that we
was
didn't get to know too much about him. I love that for the most
yeah,
part he wasn't a character. Like he had
yeah.
his presence, he had presence through his absence, which I enjoy, especially in the
Yes.
second book.
Because I was kind of nervous that he wouldn't be a character the entire book, and then he would show up at the end and be like, blah, 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 blah. And then Vish would be like,
The name's
yeah,
Ka.
right. Yeah, name's Ka. And
What
then
are we? Some sort of the will of the many?
I will say it was satisfying. The strength of the few line was a freaking baller. Like right after he
It's like,
squishes
yeah,
off. Again, eight
that was a
impact. You
good
know what? I'm sticking with that 8 on the impact because whenever he like crushed her head and he's like, it's only the strength of the few that matter. Like, oh, that's so sick. I have to give him credit that one of our criticisms with the first book was that Vis was too powerful, that he just succeeded at everything. That is not a problem here. And for the most part, there's a few things that I mean the pacing issues, especially in the fourth act, we haven't talked too much about it and we don't necessarily need to. He definitely rushes the fourth act, especially in Res, where it's like, I've been Batman for a few weeks. Like he just becomes Batman for a while, and we just gloss over the fact that he's helping all these people as like basically a vigilante. That's a really interesting point that could have been expanded, and it was definitely rushed. And so, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. But still, the entirety of the book, he's handicapped pretty much by losing an arm or by being in a society that he is not allowed to really be in, right? He's trying to fight COD. He can't, should not be seen. He's definitely taken down a notch, and I appreciated that. And there wasn't really many moments that I felt like I really do think that him getting humbled and losing fights, especially in the what was it, the I just forgot the name, Obatium Lucium, especially in Lucium, him like losing duels and losing fights and being beaten to the ground and being like understanding that he is ultimately at a disadvantage because of his arm, but that doesn't mean he can't improve. It's such a like powerful message. I really love that. Learning to be okay with your limits. But then also, of course, he like, learns to possess will and he has an epic battle at the end, and I think that's good. So, anyways, yeah, I was definitely impacted, especially by the strength of the few comment, and he did improve upon some of the main criticisms from the first book. But of course, new criticisms have popped up. And that being said, is there a difference between his style in the first book and this one? Is it improved? Is it a little worse? What did you give style and why, Nor?
I think I gave it a 7. Let me double check.
Yeah.
Yes, I gave it a 7. I'm not entirely. I can't remember what I gave the first one. I think it was an 8 or a 9. I was still genuinely impressed by the style. I think it's very consistent. My biggest criticism is, especially Obitium, felt very bland. Claustrophobic, yes, but at the same time, I could never quite picture it. All I really knew was that there was a pyramid somewhere in there, and half the time I wasn't even sure if he was inside the pyramid or outside the pyramid, if the people were dead or human or what. Maybe that's my problem because I was sort of skimming through Obitium. It did kind of bore me at times.
It's not your problem, bro. I felt the same
That
way.
being said, there were some really, really good. Okay, good. That validates me so much because I was feeling guilty. That being said, so many cool descriptions in Res and Lucium. The whole idea of like the Canon Republic just like collapsing after the council
Like
gets
the slightest
decimated by Diago.
it's not the slightest
Just some
inconvenience, but
it was just like, oh, and the descriptions of like the Sextus hunting down the Octavi and the Septimus, and it's just the whole collapse of society. It was so. And honestly, this is making me rethink my impact to make it a little bit higher because the aftermath of that scene was so cool and such a page turner. I mean, even his encounter, and I'm going again back to like impact and plot and characters, but his encounter with Relucia at the end was so satisfying. I wish we had seen more of her throughout the book because she was one of my favorite characters in the first one. But the face down at the end was
oh my
awesome.
gosh. I was like, I really had a hard time with it in a good way. Like, it was a difficult choice where it made sense. It was motivated. Like, there is it's off. Like, it feels dirty. And I kind of love that. I kind of love
100%. It
like,
felt like he
raw.
did. It felt like he was crossing a line.
Yeah, like
a little
like
bit.
Just, and that was one of the signifiers of how he
so
changed.
Exciting. It was so exciting though.
It was that to me was such a good character choice. And for him to be like, I understand you've been through a lot, but that doesn't excuse what you've done. Even after knowing her traumatic past with the sapper and him being too bad, that's an area where the style actually did work really well. The energy behind his kick and behind his words there were really good. I give it a 7.5. I mean, I think we pretty much are spot on with each other there. It's the reality is probably more like a 7.25 or somewhere in between, because I completely agree. Obitium was really difficult for me to picture. I often got lost in the sauce as to like what the setting was, what was going on, and had to really focus up. I did not experience that in Res though. Like, I knew where I was at all times in Res. I could picture what was pretty much going on.
Res was
but
clear.
I had to keep looking at the cover of the book to like ground myself in Obitium and be like, yes, there's a pyramid. Yes, like that. That's what the pyramid looks like. Yeah, there's sand. There's sand. I almost forgot. Except for the one scene where he like trudges through the desert and almost dies. And then there's like all the water, all the acid, acid water. It just is it is such an intense shift from what you would expect from the world. It was very difficult to picture. And yeah, I think honestly that, in my opinion, is the main downgrade in style from the first book is Obitium in particular. Lucium was fine. Like, I could picture it. I mean, because we have a kind of basis. And I was trying to fill in the gaps for like a Egyptian post-apocalyptic vibe, but it was kind of difficult for me so that might just be like my imagination thing as well. Whereas like Lucium, I feel like we've seen similar types of worlds, so it wasn't difficult to see the
the way I kept picturing them. Yeah, you have Res is Rome. Lucium is like Norway.
The barbarians of the
like
north.
Scandinavian.
Yeah, the barbarians of the north.
Yeah, like the Vikings. And then Obitium felt like an Egyptian land, like a hellscape. Very dark, very grim. In a weird way, like I kept picturing like Tron, in the sense of like the characters felt very static and like robotic,
really good.
even though they were it felt more like sci-fi in that sense, even though they were like ghouls, but they kind of worked as like computers, especially I forget what the name is. It starts with an N, but like the hybrid of the kids, which was a cool concept, but really hard to picture.
It definitely
with that one.
It definitely rode the line, and I appreciate him like not sticking super hard to fantasy as a thing, but it definitely rode like quite a bit into sci-fi territory. And I also imagined it as like a Tron Legacy type of vibe. I really did. Like, that's a really funny comparison, because that's kind of what I was thinking of in the robotic nature of the characters. That's funny how aligned we were on that. I want to talk more about the collapse of society though, I know that we're an hour 20 in, but I need to talk about this more.
Man, this book is just too good.
So as I've said countless times, everybody's probably sick of hearing it. I'm a PhD student for history. Like I've been reading a lot of history, especially on like violence, trauma, on atrocities, on things like the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, where American soldiers led by like William Calley killed 500 civilians. And like literally today, read an entire book on that, so it's kind of fresh on the mind. It's so interesting to see the mindset that he honestly nails. He nails a lot of the motivations because some of the main motivations behind like perpetrators committing massacres and hunting down the like Octavie, right? Hunting down the pyramids below is fear. Fear is one of the driving factors. Fear, rumor, this sense of revenge of saying, you know, like you did this to me, so collective punishment is my way to get back at you. I'm angry at the people up top, so I'm going to take it out on people. But a lot of it has to do with fear of getting surrounded and fear of the enemy, the invisible enemy. And it feels like there's like an invisible enemy here constantly in the streets. And the Octavie kind of represent that. So I definitely thought that the way he represented perpetrators committing atrocities was done quite well. However, I wanted to see more of it. Like I needed it expanded. It happened fast and it was exciting and chaotic, yet a a bit more of like the collapse itself would have been really nice. So yeah, all that to say, what did we think of the collapse of society? Did it work well? I loved the ramifications of it, showing like the prison, for example, showing how each part of society kind of had its function, and how whenever you remove some of those pieces, the gears no longer turn correctly. It was done really well. I'm just okay, dude. Pulling clips from this podcast episode is going to be so difficult because it's just pure spoilers the entire time. I was thinking about that this whole time. I'm
Yep.
like, there's like no possible real clip here. But, anyways, what did you think of the collapse of society? Did it play well for you? It sounds like you really liked it. It sounds like it was chaotic and like exciting. What was your impression of the moment in retrospect? Do you think it kind of nailed the psychological element?
It was delightful on a chaotic level. It was so fascinating. It was so fun seeing, like the extreme consequences of extreme actions. And the descriptions were so vivid, cat and burns and like buildings being destroyed and people hunting each other down, random people being thrown into the zappers and some of them being taken out. That was so cool. I don't really know a lot about like the history in our world regarding that. I just know that, revolutions tend to be very, very bloody and messy. And I know that, this type of thing, it definitely fits the bill. Naturally, this is what would happen if this happened, which it has happened. Seeing the world burn around him was fascinating. Seeing Viz be helpless throughout it all, limping, bloodied, the metal, which essentially kind of worked like nanotech, but that's a whole different story.
It was cool though.
Kind
I
of like
really liked
bleeding
it.
into him.
It
It
was
was cool.
cool.
It was cool. It was
It was
awesome.
cool.
It was awesome. The whole disorienting aspect of it, like Aiden is somewhere off in the distance, Ikua helping him out, and also essentially she also dies as a form of punishment for Viz, even though it's not really Viz's fault that the Colosseum terrorist attack happened. That was interesting, that sense of like personal justice, even if it's irrational. You do sort of sympathize. You sympathize with the guy that kills Ikua to some extent, even though it is completely irrational and unjust. But his monologue was very captivating, especially the whole, strength of a few is all that really matters.
Well, like him as
I had
a
to do a double
antagonist,
take when I read that.
him as the antagonist really like went under the radar in a good way for me because he seems like a man of words and not action. He seems like the type of guy that would make a big political statement, would make big speeches, try to embarrass you with his words. He would use his political pull to put you in certain corners. And then you just see this like parental rage come out, this just deep-seated hatred, and it was so cool. It was a really nice realization of Vis's decisions. And while you're right, it wasn't really his fault that
What I
his
see,
daughter died. But yeah, I still thought that was interesting.
yeah, no, I agree with you. The whole idea of like he going under the radar. He felt a lot like Lucius Malfoy if Lucius had lost Draco at some point in the Harry Potter franchise.
And then killed Hermione. Yeah.
Yeah, like it felt like a good take on this character archetype. You know, it's a pompous, righteous political figure that sort of cowers behind the hierarchy. But this time he actually has that parental rage, which is it's also another theme in this book. The whole idea of like, you know, we all have to draw this line, and we must swear to never cross it. Yeah, that applies as a man, that applies as a citizen, that applies as all these other things. Yeah, but as Cristobal says, as a parent, it's a whole different thing.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
I never even put
which
that
I thought
connection
was a
together.
very
That's
interesting
really good.
parallel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it
Oh
came
my gosh.
together in that way, which made it so satisfying.
Yeah, no, I like that. I would
And
have
yeah,
the entire
anything after
collapse.
the aftermath was so
Yeah.
good.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
And I think the actual downfall could have been even stronger. And this is may have been me. I was having a hard time following all of the political like allegiances. Not I understood like, okay, military on one side, religion and governance basically on the other, but it's kind of they're still separate. Like I understood that. But there was a lot of infighting between military that I was able to piece together when they would say it, but it wasn't like in my head. I wasn't able to put together all of the fracturing. And I think it would have been really satisfying if, as the reader, the fracturing was really apparent. That's one of the things that I think like a book like Game of Thrones does really well. Song of Ice and Fire. That series, the political fracturing and alliances and betrayals are baked in really well into the story that I think could have been utilized really well here. But again, it mostly had to do with Rez not getting the entirety of a book. It doesn't have the central focus like a Will of the Many. And that honestly is probably my overall impression of the book. I would still give it hardcover, like collector's edition sort of rating, because again, this is this type of series that I would want to get all the hardcovers, even if apparently hierarchy is misspelled. I'm not sure if you saw that. Do you have the book with you?
I gotta check this out.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's on it's a reversible cover, right? So if you flip it to the side that matches the first book, so not the one with the pyramid, but not the one with like the
Oh,
Levitian pyramid. Hierarchy is misspelled,
Lord. Well, then I gotta show this to the people.
which I know that some people were
H
like
E
upset about it.
I. Yeah.
I just think it's funny. I don't care. I'm like, nice.
Uh,
Anyways,
that is
so
funny.
what was I saying? Oh yeah,
It's okay.
I
I have the book facing the other cover.
yeah. I think I would still get it. That's the on our subjective scale. I would still rank it a collector's edition hardcover because again, this just has a good weight to it. It has an epic scale that I look for in a book. And while spoiler for not actual spoiler, we didn't love Catabasis, but honestly, I'm not sure we were the right audience for Catabasis, whereas we are for this one. Like this is our type of book, and we still liked it, and so I'd say overall impressions, what it suffered from was a lack of central focus that the first book had. And because of that, it echoes into a lot of flat characters and some stilted pacing that didn't exist in the first book because of focus. Yet still, through that, Islington was able to tell a compelling story with compelling questions and compelling characters. What do you think about that?
I think I agree. I agree with everything you said. I think I would give it a paperback rating and then switch The Will of the Many to a hardcover. Weirdly enough, for the same reasons. I think the ways that this book kind of falters do kind of bring it down a little bit for me. The impact is still relatively low compared to the Will of the Many. That being said, I think a lot of the mistakes are, or not necessarily mistakes, but the problems with the book, the issues, are things that the author had to figure out. The type of mistakes you have to make because of the novel nature of this novel, right? The whole idea of the protagonist being in a different world, etc. And I do think, just like how the Will of the Many addressed a lot of the problems, or sorry, just like how the Strength of the Few addressed a lot of the problems that the Will of the Many had, I think the next book is gonna address the problems that this one had. I think it's only gonna get better from here on out. I think a lot of this book just required a lot of setup. We're introduced to new characters, new worlds, new visits, and I think next time is when the things, we got the ball rolling here, and now we really are gonna get to see the juicy action, the political intrigue, the actions to the consequences to the actions that happen in this book. And then, now that I really think about it, now that we're talking about the other books that we've read, I think I've gotten the wrong version for every book we've read. By what I mean is, for The Devils and Catabasis and this one, I have hardcovers when I would have rated them lower. And then for Project Hail Mary and The Will of the Many, I have paperbacks, even though I wish I had the hardcovers.
I didn't
So
realize
this
you had
is
the
kind of
paperback.
really
That's
getting to
really funny.
me. This is
That's
getting
really
to me
funny.
big time.
Dude, you'll get it right eventually.
But it's
You'll
okay.
get it right eventually.
One day. I do think that our next book, which is A Court of Thorns and Roses,
Two
I got it as an
gentlemen.
ebook,
Yeah, I also have it as an ebook. All right, so a good
and
explanation
I
really
think it's
quick.
going to say an ebook.
First of all the bros out there should read A Court of Thorns and Roses with us. I think that I'm gonna give it an honest take. I'm gonna really try. I think I'm gonna enjoy it, but kind of ironically, we'll see. My wife just finished the entire series, and we'll see if she joins us. I'm gonna try and convince her to join us to read it, because I think that would be kind of funny to have. Well, also probably appropriate, somebody who's a little bit more up the audience alley for the book. I don't think it's written for us, but still, it's going to be a really fun time and a joyous way to end the year. So if you want to join us,
love it.
we're going to read A Court of Thorns and Roses. We're like a good decade behind, probably on reading this, but never
Better
say never.
late than never.
Better late than never. So anyways, wait, Nora, did you finish your drink? Oh, it looks like you did. I also finished my drink, because here at Novels and Nightcaps, we finish our drinks. Have a good night.